Okay. Hello, my name is Adrienne, and I would like to share about topics in AAC, emerging literacy. A little bit, a little bit about myself first. I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD earlier this year. It's something that I knew about myself for a long time, but I got an official diagnosis in February. This helped me accept and better understand a lot of the things about myself that are different. And it's the reason that I've become so passionate about community building and support. I am a lover of all things books and literacy. I, it's not necessarily a specialty area of mine as a speech therapist, but it's something that I really enjoy personally. And that's because my grandmother was a librarian. She made sure that I had someone in my life who would read books to me. And even though as a child I struggled a lot with reading comprehension due to undiagnosed disability, it and it was difficult for me, I still grew up with a really strong love for books because of her. I am a speech and language pathologist. I became an SLP to be the person in somebody's life that I didn't get to have as a child. I think that everyone deserves to be understood and have a voice, and that everyone deserves access to a good book. So let's dive right in. I want to talk about literacy first, and then we will talk more about AAC and how it relates to literacy in ways that we can support both of them together a bit later in the presentation. So, why does literacy matter? Literacy opens the door for connection to culture, connection to others. It is just one of the ways that we can access and record narratives, and it's a really powerful way that we can. With literacy, we can open the door to this world. Shared book reading creates opportunities for social interaction and shared culture. We learn a lot about the people in our lives and the world around us through book reading. And reading books and literacy can enrich creativity, and it might fuel imaginative and meaningful play as well. Books model storytelling in a fun and engaging way, and they can help us build the foundation for personal narratives and sharing our own stories later in life. Everyone learns differently, and that's a really important reminder that children with speech or language delays are more likely to struggle with reading later and are more vulnerable to environmental and social barriers to accessing literacy education. Here's a little bit more about the statistics when it comes to literacy. Per the National Literacy Institute, 79% of US adults are literate. 54% of adults have literacy skills that are considered below a sixth grade level. The estimated yearly cost of illiteracy, so things to support programs for literacy, supporting people who don't have literacy skills, is estimated to be about $2.2 trillion. California has the lowest adult literacy rate in the United States, and the US as a whole ranks 36th in literacy. Some of the major factors globally that impact access to literacy skills is poverty and gender. So, women are less likely to have access to learning to read, and people who are living in poverty may not have access to the funds, the time, or the resources to support literacy skills and learn to read. In the US specifically, like I said, poverty is a huge factor that impacts access to literacy. There's also other factors like learning differences, disabilities, and lack of diagnosis, which we know impacts children's ability to learn to read, and it impacts their access to literacy curriculum as well. And limited access to adult literacy programs also significantly impacts literacy rates in the US. I provided some resources here that I will link down below. These are just some resources that I found for free resources to help improve literacy, some community literacy supports. I listed the San Diego Public Library, but you can check with your local library for location-specific resources. And there are lots of free books available either through your local library or online. I listed a couple of places where there are free books available for kids and free books available for adults. Literacy is not just one skill. I think when we talk about literacy, sometimes there's this misconception that literacy lives somewhere in our brain and it's a skill that we have and are born with. But the reality is that reading is a taught skill. Writing systems were first used in about 3200 BCE, which is only about 5,000 years ago. Modern humans first appeared 230,000 years ago. So you can imagine that there was a ton of evolution that happened before writing systems even emerged. And writing systems really have evolved alongside human development in recent history. Our brains use a set of different skills to help us access literacy. So you can see in Scarborough's reading rope over here, the different skill areas. In general, our brain is using our language skills, our print skills, our ability to recognize and see letters, vocabulary skills, recognition and comprehension skills, and all of these come together to help us decode written text. There is no single brain area that has yet evolved for literacy. When we talk about literacy, I think typically we're thinking about school age kids. So at 3 years old, these are some of the skills that we would expect kids to have. They're able to orient the book the correct direction. They're able to listen to a story. They're understanding the pictures that are in a book. They can distinguish print from pictures, even if they don't know what the print says. They know that they're different things and they have different meanings. And well, they have related meanings, but they're different things that exist on the page. Kids at 3 years old who are first entering a school can recognize some letters. And I think that's a point that I really want to highlight, is that these kids are recognizing some letters. I think a lot of times in early intervention, I see parents really focused on teaching the alphabet. And it is true that the alphabet is a significant factor in the foundation of literacy skills. And I would never recommend not teaching it, especially if a child is really interested in it and really likes learning the alphabet. But there's no reason to be drilling it at this age. And school is going to be where those skills are really fostered and grown for those children. At 4 years old, as kids are continuing through school age, they know the alphabet and they're able to recognize many letters. So, saying the alphabet, reading and looking at the alphabet and recognizing the letters, different skills. So they can also make connections between stories and life. So this is where the really meaningful connections with reading come into play. They can produce rhymes and alliterations, and they might be pretending to write or draw in order to communicate their ideas. At 5 years old, kids can recognize the features of text. So things like the title, the author, just the structures of the book. They can name and write most letters. They recognize and spell simple words, so things like sight words. And they engage with stories through questioning and drawing connections. So they're getting curious about what they're reading, they're drawing connections between their life and what they read. It's a really impactful time for literacy skills. They also might use invented spelling to communicate ideas in writing. So kids are so creative and they are figuring out ways to write what they have language wise in their head. Now, learning to read and write is an ongoing process from infancy. It starts before we turn 3 years of age. So, what does that look like? Some of the predictors of later literacy success include vocabulary knowledge, early experiences with books and print, opportunities to apply knowledge and skills from books in meaningful situations, world experience and background knowledge, and supportive caregivers. Like I said, knowing the alphabet and knowing how to orient books, all of those things are also very important and are foundational and predictors of later literacy success as well. But here I'm highlighting some of the things that we don't often focus on, and that can be really impactful if we widen our scope for what early literacy really looks like from birth to 3 years of age before kids enter school. Kids at this age, and honestly, anybody learns through play. I know that some of my most impactful life experiences to this day are the ones where I am engaged, I am interested, and I am having fun. And the same is true for kids and learning to read. If we are learning through rote practice, so drills and repetition, it's going to require a lot more effort in order to generalize and meaningfully engage with what is learned. I think the research says something like 100 or more trials are needed in order to learn a skill in a way that we can then generalize and use it in more flexible ways. But if we shift our perspective and think about learning through play, the research tells us that it might take less than 10 experiences with a skill in order to learn it and generalize it effectively. And that's because we're following the engagement, we're following interest, and we're following the curiosity. It's lighting up our brain and it's leaving an impression on us that helps us make meaningful connections with the real world and boost our carryover to different contexts. Taking a look from birth, literacy skills start with just sensory exploration. Kids and babies and infants, they start exploring the world with their sensory system first and their motor system first. So, from 0 to 3 months of age, we're going to want to be face to face with babies, interacting with them, and making sounds together, just engaging with them in a way that's really visual and engaging for them. From 4 to 6 months, we might want to make exaggerated facial expressions, things like a really big smile, things like a really big frown, stuff like that, things that are going to draw the baby's attention and get them interested in those differences in what we're doing. We might also like to hold up objects of interest and provide opportunities for these children to explore books with their sensory systems. So we can provide books with crunchy or flexible pages, board books, and books that have parts that are safe for them to put in their mouth because they likely will, and it's a normal part of exploring at this age. From 6 to 12 months, this is when kids might start to say their first words and they're going to start pointing. They're going to be interested in the things that we're saying. So, we're going to want to encourage exploration of books by pointing for them, pointing at the pictures, turning the pages, and naming what we see. We also want to continue vocalizing together. We can make silly sounds, we can make animal sounds, we can make environmental sounds like cars, things that let the baby explore different sounds and the speech system in a fun way that meets them where they are at in their literacy journey. Moving on to the next couple of years before we enter school age, from 13 to 36 months. At 13 to 18 months, kids are going to have variable attention skills, but their attention skills are increasing and they're going to be interested in participating in shared book reading activities. So, sitting together, still face to face, and still relying on those foundational skills that we were talking about in the last slide, and starting to do things like asking simple questions, Kids at this age may start to understand where questions and they're learning to point themselves. So, this is a really great way to encourage that natural communication. We can also point to and name objects, people, and body parts together. We want to continue expanding their vocabulary, and we want to narrate the story in our own words. The reason that I say in our own words is because if we use the words that are natural for us, it's going to be more engaging and more natural, and less boring and less complex. And it's going to reduce the demands that that shared book reading activity has and help keep your child engaged for longer periods. Um, I know from my personal practice, if I sit there and try to read a book word for word with a child, they are immediately getting up and walking away, unless that's what they want me to do, and they're not ready for it yet. From 18 to 24 months, it's helpful to start relating books to your child's experiences. So that might include daily routines, their feelings, activities that you've done or plan to do together. And you can also expand the types of questions that you're asking. Kids at this age typically will start to understand what questions and who questions. I do want to say, though, if you are raising a gestalt processor, you may want to hold off on introducing questions and focus more on declarative language because declarative language is going to be more flexible and they're going to be able to use it more functionally. It's okay to ask questions, but you don't want your focus to be there for gestalt processors in particular. From 24 to 36 months, we can expand shared book reading routines to include additional activities. So kids are starting to take what they know from books and expand it out into their real world. Kids at this age might enjoy pretend play, singing songs related to their books. You can also encourage kids to join in on shared book reading by allowing them to fill in the blank on favorite books or swapping roles, giving them the book and asking them to tell you the story. That is one of my favorite activities in some of my early intervention sessions as kids are getting close to 3 years of age. I love handing them the book and saying, Your turn, and seeing what they do with it. They might just flip through it. They might show me their favorite pictures. They might hand the book back to me. They might set it aside. But it's an opportunity for them to join in and show us what they know. So now that we've kind of gone through the background of literacy development and what it looks like, some strategies to support, I want to tie it back into AAC. Just to revisit, children with speech and or language delays are more likely to struggle with reading later and are more vulnerable to environmental and social barriers to accessing literacy education. So let's address that. When we think about emerging literacy for AAC users, a lot of the things that we are going to do with them are exactly the same. We still want to have face-to-face interactions. We still want to be engaging, making silly facial expressions, making silly sounds. We want to be pointing and using the vocabulary that we know, but we're just bringing AAC into the picture. We want to foster any early signs of interest in literacy, so motor and sensory exploration. I have worked with really young kids who are first being introduced to AAC, and they love to explore it with their face. Put it on their face. They love to explore it with their feet, with their hands, with their whole body. So they are learning how to pick it up, how to orient it, some kids really like orienting it back and forth and seeing the screen swap from different orientations. So I always encourage this. Some parents get a little bit uncomfortable. They don't want their kid taking my device and putting it up to their face. But the reality is that this is how these kids learn, and the device is cleanable. So they also might be interested in tapping letters on the keyboard. Remember that we're not necessarily drilling them on the alphabet, but we're giving them opportunities to engage with the alphabet, hear the sounds, see how the keyboard is laid out, watch how we use it. So we might see them kind of babbling by touching letters on the keyboard. They might also select familiar images, possibly on repeat. And all of this is similar to what we know about typically developing kids in literacy who love touching the pictures that they see, naming them, talking about them, commenting on them, all of those really fun things, but just on an AAC device. We can use shared book reading to expand AAC skills in some really special ways. So, focusing on core vocabulary and programming in fringe vocabulary. So, just as a reminder, core vocabulary represents about 80% of the words that we use on a day-to-day basis. And it's estimated to be about 50 to 400 words that can be used and represent that 80%. And typically, core words are pre programmed and ready to use on most devices. So, that is the easiest way to get started with expanding those AAC skills. We can also support early grammar development, so modeling different parts of speech. We don't want to just label things. We can use pronouns, we can use descriptive words, we can label nouns. We can show some of the grammar features of the device, even if the child isn't ready for it. We are setting that foundation for what they will be able to do someday. We also want to be modeling device navigation and features. If we think back to typical development, when kids reach school age, around 5 years old, they're starting to recognize the features of the text. And so we can start this early by modeling the features of both books and AAC devices in a way that's age appropriate for them. Typically, what this looks like for me working in early intervention is just doing what I would normally do with the device, but with the child there present with me and maybe narrating what I'm doing and why. Some kids are into it, some aren't. That's okay. They don't have to be interested in it at this age, but the idea is giving them that early exposure. Some of the device navigation and features that we might want to model include folder and device navigation. So, navigating between folders, finding our way back to the home screen, switching languages if you're raising a bilingual child, things like that that show us the functions of the device. We also may want to model grammar features, like I mentioned. We can show the keyboard and what it looks like to search for vocabulary. We can change the voices, and for some devices, we can even change the affect. Most devices have different voices that we can switch out. So things like the novelty voices may be fun for certain book reading activities. And then there are some devices who give you the ability to change between happy, sad, angry, whisper voice, like a Vaz has that feature, and Weave Chat has that feature. All right. Now let's make it fun. So we want literacy to be fun and we want AAC and literacy to be fun as well. So some things that we can do to encourage that engagement, to encourage that curiosity and that interest is programming names of favorite books and favorite characters into the reading folder of the device. Remember that this represents fringe vocabulary, so we want to leave the home page as it is and go find the reading folder or add a reading folder if for some reason your device doesn't have one yet. We can use aided language stimulation to share core vocabulary. One way that we can do this is pre-planning for favorite books and writing the words that we want to use on the device onto sticky notes, putting them in the book, and then while you're reading the book, you can take the sticky notes off. It's going to draw your child's attention to what you've said, what's on the page, this sticky note that you're taking off. And then when you go to model it on the device, they're going to be even more interested in what it is that you have to share. You can also use digital books to reduce motor demands and increase engagement. For some kids that don't have a strong background in literacy yet, I will start with digital books because it's going to get them interested right away. I choose ones that are still pretty close to what a book looks like. It's taking away that demand for them to be flipping the pages. It's taking away the demand for me to be super engaging and make all of the silly voices and read it in any special way because it's already done by somebody else and it's still literacy and it's still a book. So that is one way that we can make reading fun, especially for kids who have really significant delays. All right. That is all that I have for you. I hope that you were able to take something from this that you can use with your child or with your caseload. I think if I were to leave you with any single thought, is just to have books around and try to introduce some times where you are sharing books with children. Um, I only ever saw my grandmother maybe once a month as a child, maybe more like once a week. And she would only read to me during those times. And it significantly impacted how I responded to and looked at books in the rest of my day. So if you can be that person who sits with a child, brings the engagement to a book, and lights up that world for them, be that person because you never know where they're going to be 20 years from then. Thank you so much for watching.